In this episode, we're going to give you an idea of what to expect if you're planning to buy in 2024.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for home buyers who want to get it right.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. And that's a good thing because between us, we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories and avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on.
We've got loads of free tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. There you'll get access to our free webinar, How to Buy Your First Home with the Right Amount of Debt. You'll also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to be educated home buyers. We have created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority or your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're talking about what to expect in the property market next year. We're going to give you practical tips for getting yourself ready to buy in 2024. But before we do that, what is your special house this week, Meighan? It doesn't seem to be the right season for us.
I'm going there tomorrow because it's 33 degrees in Brisbane today. And here is the tree house in Norway, which looks lovely and cool and
cozy.
Just absolutely gorgeous. So again, from the Airbnb OMG category, which I am quite addicted to at the moment. I feel like I'm traveling vicariously through Airbnb, but I think it just looks beautiful.
It absolutely does. I think we should be sending them our episodes and saying, look, we've been promoting you. How about you throw us a few dollars? All right. So,
well, what is the market going to do, Veronica? First and foremost, we will say we do not have a crystal ball. We do not predict the property market. We are not forecasters. We're not economists. What we do want to tell you is what we're seeing in terms of behaviour.
Yep. And might we just say too that forecasters and economists get it wrong way more than they get it right anyway. So even if we were, we'd be treading dangerously if we were to predict what's going to happen.
We'd be deleting our episodes where we're forecasting.
We would. We'd be going, right, let's get rid of that one. But I think what we can all agree that 2023 surprised most people, right? Because interest rates continued to rise and so did prices. And that was predicted by a hell of a lot of experts to not happen, and yet it did.
Because these things usually don't go hand in hand.
Well, this is the thing. It seems logical that they do, but they actually don't. And there's no actual correlation between interest rates and prices. But despite, lots of people saying that there were. And the reality too, if you look back even just to the COVID years, 2020 surprised everybody, 2021 surprised everybody, 22 didn't surprise everybody because we were all expecting prices to go down a bit, and 23 did surprise everybody. So that's 1 out of 4 years was no surprise. So therefore, looking forward to 2024, all I can say is be prepared to be surprised.
I think just about anyone who calls themselves a forecaster or an analyst who predicts something that might happen in the future could probably in one of those 4 years say they got it right. There's a chance in one of those 4 years they might have got it right, but I'll bet there are very few who could have got it right 4 times in a row.
Yeah. In fact, you're absolutely right because, I do co-author a report called the Fool or Forecaster Report, and, we've been doing that for 5 years and nobody's got it right all 5 years. Some people have got it right too, but nobody's got it right 5. So, but there is a bunch of key things, obviously, that we need to consider in the property market. And probably top of the list, let's hit interest rates. And I guess the big question is, are they going to go up, down, or both? They could do both.
Yeah, and look, we've just had the interest rate decision for December 2023, and that was to hold. So I think a bunch of people thought they'd go up, a bunch of people thought they'd hold, and I don't think I heard anyone predicting they'd go down. So
no, but it was apparently only 5% probability that the odds are 5% that was going to go up. So therefore, the majority seemed to hold that
to
it
think
was
that
going
was
to
the way it was
hold.
going to go. And of course, the next decision, we don't have one in January.
Correct. So we won't know really what's going to happen in February. And if you did listen to the Michelle Bullock's speech, she did talk about, waiting and seeing and watching what happens with inflation, all the rest of it. But you know what? Regardless, I think the important thing to understand is that if you're thinking the interest rates going up or down or sideways or whatever is going to be the reason that you do buy or don't buy, our advice is you just have to deal with the realities of what's happening. You can't have that dictate what you do. A lot of people at the beginning of the interest rate rises would have waited, but then they hadn't anticipated that with each rise reduces or basically results in a fall in their borrowing capacity. And that has critical, really terrible impact on some buyers because it meant that basically their capacity was falling faster than prices were falling. That's in 2022.
Yeah.
And so then we've had a return to prices rising in 2023. So if you're being tossed around and you're being reactive to interest rates, then you really just have to pin your ears back and do what's right for you in terms of buying a property, not be waiting or otherwise because of interest rates.
Yeah, and it I guess it also brings to mind the importance of buffers and having that little war chest of additional money to cover things and to cover those expected or unexpected situations, whether it be maintenance or interest rate rises. There was a bunch of people back in 2020 who, interest rates were really low and people pushed themselves to their absolute borrowing capacity and didn't really understand that the interest rates could rise as rapidly as they did. And they hadn't really put enough away to cope with those kinds of rises for an extended period of time. So whilst we haven't seen a huge amount of mortgage absolute distress, there are a number of people now who are thinking, wow, I really hadn't thought about what would happen if interest rates went up by 3%. So that's the important thing, is not so much to say, oh, I might wait until interest rates stop rising. It's to actually go into that lending environment, into that property purchasing decision, going, okay, if interest rates continue to rise and it's another 3%, have I got the financial capacity to pay my mortgage and to not feel like I'm absolutely stretched beyond my mental capacity and emotional capacity to retain this house? So the decision isn't necessarily don't do it. It's to actually make sure that your buffer or your capability to pay will allow for more rate rises, and then you can sit in a really much more comfortable position.
Also, the simple fact is that you can fix rates, and with the advice of your broker, of course, certainly not with our advice, you can fix rates, but you can't fix rates if you don't have a mortgage. So, if you're waiting to buy and you're going,
well made.
Yeah, you can't fix them, and so some people, in fact, I was talking to somebody the other day who actually fixed until 2026. Could you imagine? God, they must be so happy with themselves. That was before rates started going up. I mean, oh my God.
Even when it went up, the first couple of times, a number of people were still on fixed rates, so it wasn't actually, within their means to do anything about those refixing again. But you're right, if you don't have the mortgage, you can't fix the rate.
Exactly right. So that's another reason to, if you're ready, not delay is all I can say. So as Meighan said, but buffers are very important. You've also got some experts talking about a cut to interest rates sometime in 2024.
Yeah.
And this could spark buyer demand. So once again, we're not saying rates are going to go up or they're going to go down. I think by balanced probabilities probably do both at different times. But each of those things does have an impact, which is not necessarily going to play into your court, right? So you just have to make your own decisions based on your own circumstances, being aware and being sensible about it. Now, obviously, there's a seasonality around the property market as well. And so here we are in December. I'm not quite sure when it's going to go to air. It might go to air very, very early January.
No, it's actually the end of December.
This is going to air in the very end of December. So I hope you've had a lovely Christmas.
And this is this time of year, Veronica, the reason that we do this podcast this time of year is the rush of Christmas is over and everyone's sort of had their fill and they're sitting back often and starting to have a conversation with each other and say, gee, you know, we thought we might start thinking about buying a house this year, but really, you know, let's knuckle down and do it. Let's actually get ourselves in a position, both financially and from an education position, to do this seriously this year. Because if you look back, and you've been saying this for the last 4 years, what you can buy now for the same money that you could have bought something for back then, if you've delayed your decision for whatever reason, is vastly different. So if you delay it again, if you're sitting here in 2025 saying, oh, geez, you know, we said we'd do it this year and we didn't and things got busy, well, you know, maybe it's time to make it a priority. Talk to each other now and start preparing, because now is the quiet time. This is the prep time. It's the perfect time. Most agents are on holidays during January. Yeah, it is like quiet town in Brisbane, in the property market in Brisbane. I imagine Sydney's possibly quite similar. You just don't
100%.
see those new listings come on.
Well, I love this time. Well, yeah, this time of year, because basically it's the only time when literally you can't buy anything. You know, it's just like nothing's happening.
Christmas to about the 20th of January.
It's it does start back a little bit earlier in Sydney. In fact, this year agents are saying that they're going to be, you know, starting campaigns on the 15th of January. So they're talking about quite a bit of stock on. So you know, and look, we'll get to a lack of stock in a minute, because that's what we want to talk about as well, to expect. But certainly now in this lull in a couple of weeks around Christmas, New Year's, that is a great time. That is a time when a lot of people do reflect and sit back. They've got time to think about what they really want to do in the coming year. And that is why often the beginning of the year is quite busy in a property sense. And so, you know, we encourage you to take this opportunity to take your time and skill yourself up and get yourself ready to buy in an educational sense. And obviously we're going to recommend you do our course, right? Because this is the time to do it. The rest of the year you get so busy. And if you get that foundational knowledge in place, you're going to make better decisions as you get to that point. And you're going to beat
the rest of the market who aren't ready. And
exactly,
I guess that's the key, isn't it? Because whilst you might be lamenting the fact that there's not a huge amount of property to choose from in this quiet period, this is the perfect time to actually get yourself armed and ready to hit the ground running as soon as those properties become available. Because anyone who's not doing this preparation now, they're going to be behind the 8 ball. They're not going to be ready to move. So there is this small window of opportunity where you might actually have less competition because people just aren't ready. And if you're ready, you're in a powerful position.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there's certainly was said earlier that, or we both said earlier, that most of January is pretty dead. As I said, there's talk that the middle of January things are going to ramp up. Typically, you'll see more stock coming on at the same to coincide with back to school. That's typically what you will see, because of course people who want to sell their property, they want to maximise their exposure to the greater market. But there are going to be people who have bought in the end of 2023 who will want to sell earlier than that. So, you know, it's not all done and dusted. It's definitely well worth being very alert and very on top of it. But generally speaking, there has been an ongoing problem with lack of stock. And certainly that was really tightened up in 2022, and it has eased at the very end of 2023. But that said, we always find the good stock is in short supply. So don't be anticipating much of a real meaningful change here, because it's a thing that we hear from buyers all the time, but there's nothing, you know, really to look at. And we hear that in times of lots of stock and in times of low stock.
Yeah. Just because there's volume doesn't mean there's quality. And I think that's a good point that you make there, Veronica, because just if you see a large number of new listings come on and you think, oh, there's so much more to see, but you eliminate the things that either don't match outside your price range or are just such low quality or have too many the wrong sets of compromises, that doesn't necessarily mean that gives you more to choose from.
Yeah. It's a harsh reality, but very true. One thing that we have seen through this year, and in fact, what you typically do see this when prices are rising is that unrenovated homes become, well, actually when prices are rising, unrenovated homes become really popular because that's the way buyers think that it's the only way they're going to get into the market. I'm going to have to buy to renovate. It's the only way I can get in. But actually, because we've had rising building costs and also a shortage of trades, unrenovated homes are becoming less popular. So if you're a bit handy, or if you've got a trade yourself, or if you're from a family of trades, this actually could be an opportunity. And understanding that at the moment, these ones are a little bit less in demand. And so you might be able to get a bit more of a bargain if you're prepared and capable of renovating. Just don't assume that it's...
Don't bite off more than you can chew.
Don't watch the block and think it's easy.
Yeah, let's be cut to the chase here. Renovating a property isn't just about doing a coat of paint and changing the floor coverings. It's if you think you're going to flip something and make a great profit out of it, then you've got to be sadly and sorely mistaken. But if this is something that actually enables you to get into a slightly better street, a slightly better position, a slightly better floor plan, and you can tweak things and add things over time, and your finances allow for you to do that, because remember, you can't necessarily borrow the money to do this unless you do a construction loan. You actually have to have the funds to do renovations, but it can be an opportunity. And I think the important thing if you're going to go into a renovation is to understand building costs, what it's actually going to cost you, and to be very, very careful in your planning that what you're doing is going to add value to the property and be a very attractive proposition for the person that you're going to sell it to in the future. Because remember, capital growth comes from the future buyer of your property. So if you're doing a renovation that's very unique and specialised to you, but you have plans to sell that property in a 3, 5, 7 year time frame, you might have actually sunk some money into something that you shouldn't have in the wrong areas. So certainly get some advice and input and find out what people do like, so that you're putting your renovation dollars in the right place.
100%. Now, there also is to be expected that we're going to have a continued housing shortage across the board, particularly because of immigration being so high. And that's not looking like it's going to slow down. And that's particularly felt in the major capitals. And that where that impacts first home buyers is because a lot of those immigrants are actually buying because they can't find somewhere to rent. Now, they may not be buying the same sorts of properties that you would be buying. A lot of people come from countries where it's really, really normal to live in an apartment, for argument's sake. So therefore, for them to go buying in high-rise apartments is no big deal. And that we're not going to encourage you to buy in high-rises. It's very unusual that we'd see a high-rise that we would encourage a first-home buyer to buy into. So they're not necessarily going to be buying the same sort of property, but it is to be understood, though, that this continued higher rate of immigration, coupled with the fact that we do have a rental shortage, as is well publicised, means that we do have continued upward pressure on housing, or continued pressure on the housing market. And, experts are saying that the rental shortage could take 10 years to fix.
Yeah, Veronica, this has been like the storm of bad policy, of a bit of COVID in there, But what's happened with this rental shortage, and I'm very, very invested in this space, is we're not seeing private investment at the levels that we have in the past, and we'll start to see some figures roll through. Investors are selling their properties. There's been a lot of legislative meetings around changes and actual changes that, while it's really good for tenants and very supportive of the tenant situation, haven't necessarily been supportive of the landlord situation. And in that, for those reasons, some landlords, private landlords, have just sold their properties. Now, the good thing is often those kind of properties are quite attractive to first home buyers. They often land in that kind of price range. So it adds, when investors sell, it does add a little bit to the potential first home buyer market in the established property market. We are not talking new, we're not talking off plan, we're not talking about, anything that an incentive or a grant is out there to do, which is increase stock and supply. A little bit of green shoots is starting to be seen in the rental market in some areas, and I am starting to hear property managers say they're seeing less applications for rental properties at the moment than they have in a long time. And in the last few years, December and January have been very, very strong for rental applications. If that's starting to back off a little bit, then that tells us that either people are staying put for a lot longer, and they're just choosing not to move, or a little bit more, there's a little bit less demand on rental markets. So it's just I don't know if it's a blip in demand at the moment just because of Christmas, people are staying put, not necessarily moving around, but there has been a slight lessening of the number of applications on rental properties. And that's coming from a variety of different locations, not just Brisbane.
Yeah, it's definitely not the situation in Sydney. It's hot here. There's a massive, huge shortage. So these are all pressures that first home buyers need to just be aware of. And of course, you're probably acutely aware of it because you're probably in the rental market right at the moment. But what it does, there are, as Meighan said, investors have been selling up in quite high proportions as well. So that does free up some stock for first home buyers. There's no doubt about that. But it also does make it difficult if you are a first home buyer and you're saving because your rents have been going up. So it's just being aware that this is, whilst the rate of rental increase, it's sort of, there's got to be a lid on it because there are affordability pressures in the rental side of things that don't apply in the same way in the property price, as in property value side of things. It is still a pretty dire situation, obviously, and we're not seeing a real light at the end of the tunnel on that one. Now, and one of the things that, we said at the head of this, that we're very careful not to predict property prices, not even really direction, to be quite frank. Very nervous about that. But at this stage, very cautiously saying this, the signs are pointing at continued price growth. It doesn't have to be rapid price growth, but just, some modest price growth in most cities. But there's been quite a lot of data showing that regional prices have actually started to soften, and in some areas are falling due to that sort of U-turn of the sea and tree changer that is either having to return to the office and then therefore return to a city, or realising that the regional lifestyle is not necessarily for them. So for whatever reason that U-turn is happening, it is documented now. And it could be good news for you if you're wanting to buy into a regional area, but it's also something to be wary of. You want to make sure that if ever you are buying into an area that might have been a bit overheated at some point, you want to be careful, obviously, in your timing there.
Pricing. Yeah, absolutely. And that may present opportunity. It may present an opportunity to look at in an area that you hadn't. We did an episode, I can't remember what number it was, but we did a virtual road trip with some students who talked about not actually being fixated in one location. They could really live anywhere because of their situation. And so we did an episode on doing a virtual road trip. Now, as Veronica says, what you've got to be really careful in your pricing in markets that have turned or are softening is that you're really acutely aware of what the market conditions are and which way to adjust your pricing when you're doing comparable sales analysis. Now, anyone who's done the free course knows what I'm talking about, the free mini course. If you haven't, get out and do it. It doesn't cost you anything. It arms you with information. You understand what we're talking about and what agents are talking about.
And it's on our website, just Homebuyer Academy /.com.au/free course, right? So it's there.
It's there. But we talk about the X factor or understanding market conditions in that course, and you've got to be really, really cautious. Whether it's in a rising market and you adjust up, or if it's in a softening market, you need to adjust down, but you can't adjust too far in one direction or the other because things can change as well.
They can. And look, the thing too is a regional property can be a bit harder to price than, say, property in the suburbs or, in a more urban area. So, obviously we understand that. The other thing too that I've always recommended people rent if they're going to go and move to an area they're not familiar with. Now, if you're already familiar with the area, you're probably already renting, or perhaps you're living with family. But certainly that's been a problem. With the rental shortage across the country, it's been really hard for people to rent before they buy, so they can't try the area before they buy, which could be one of the reasons why we've seen this U-turn. Whereas if they had been able to rent first, some people would have realised it's not for them, and instead of committing to the area and to a property. So these are the things to be very mindful of if you are going to go and buy in any area that's different to what you're used to. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be regional there. It could be going into another city.
Another suburb.
Even another suburb. But yes. Well, another part of the city, shall we say.
Rent there, but it's certainly a good idea to immerse yourself if you're looking in a different suburb.
That's exactly right. Spend a lot of time. Now, obviously, there's going to be sort of more government initiatives. There's always stuff being rolled out. The Queensland government recently doubled the incentive for first home buyers who buy brand new, of course. What do we think about that, Meighan?
Well, I think the thing we always like to remind people of is that sometimes and many of these grants and incentives are really there. In some cases, it was to stimulate the economy. So that's what we saw post-COVID. In this case, it's to increase supply. So what will happen in these with these schemes is there will be an upper limit, and in a lot of cases there are income test limits for singles and couples. So it's really important to understand that these schemes are not there to help first home buyers get into the property market. They are there to increase the supply, to take pressure off the rental crisis and also the upward pressure on prices. What we want to caution you about, and we've done many episodes on this and we talk about it ad nauseum in the course, is we want to make sure that you're making the right property decision for you, not limiting yourself or targeting specific types of properties in order to get a grant or incentive. So you really need to step away and say, now, if you have the capacity to borrow $800,000 and get a really good quality asset, but you want to get a $30,000 incentive from the government, so you limit yourself to $650,000, then you're potentially pigeonholing yourself into a situation where you could be stuck in that property potentially with negative equity until the market actually takes it up above what you paid for it.
Yeah.
So your price might go back before it goes forward, versus being in something that actually could have had capital growth, compounding capital growth, had you bought a better asset, but gone without the incentive or the grant.
It's a hard thing to get your head around because it feels like free money, but if it actually costs you in terms of the value of your property, then it is a false economy. And as Meighan said, you've got to think about, why is the government putting this forward? And often often it's unveiled, like they're not even pretending that it's not to stimulate construction. So the very fact that they're even saying it, you think, oh, okay, now I get what the purpose of this is, and I'm just a little guy, and I'm going to be used to help, stimulate a whole industry to create more homes. And yes, we need more homes, but we don't want our listeners being the guinea pigs for this stuff and being the fuel for the fire, so to speak. Another area of government assistance, and I'm going to quote from a report the Domain put out, which is sort of interesting sort of bent on this. It said the flight to affordability for first home buyers will be ignited by the federal government's Help to Buy. And that is a shared equity scheme of up to 40% of a home. It's a 4-year program likely to commence in 2024. Access will be restricted to residents in states that have enacted legislation endorsing the program, and all have agreed to pass legislation, which should happen early next year. Now, this is actually, we don't know enough of the detail of it yet, but on the surface, a shared equity scheme is not a bad idea for a first home buyer to consider. And so you've got to look where it suits your requirements, but this is basically where you are able to get into a bigger home and therefore not have to trade up so often, or potentially get into a home because you've saved some money but not enough. So there's a number of people that this could help, and so keep an eye out for that, because that's something that's going to become out in 2024, and I think is really important for first home buyers
to be aware of how government is trying to help and which of these initiatives really help first home buyers versus help other segments of our economy. Another thing that has been a government response to our housing crisis or our housing shortage is some quite extensive rezoning. Now, certainly in Sydney, we've seen the state government has been very active on this front. I'm not sure about other cities in an intimate sense, but I do know that pressure is on state governments across the board, but also obviously local councils to rezone certain areas for higher density. And, as governments are responding to the housing crisis, this is going to lead to more apartments and more townhouses being built, which is going to be great to have more stock, but it is a danger zone for first home buyers. And so we want you just to be very careful about looking to that as being your silver bullet, because where there's lots and lots of stock and also being very quickly built and very little scarcity, then that is something to be very wary of as a first home buyer by getting sort of stuck with a poor asset that isn't going to grow in value very, very much.
Yeah, and we you and I were talking about this earlier today, Veronica. One of the challenges for off-plan or brand new, where they're in the zone for an incentive or a grant, is you and your cohort of similar first home buyers who can access these grants. You're the buyer for the brand new product, but you've got to really think about who is going to be the buyer from you, because that property will no longer qualify for the grant. So therefore, first home buyers are going to look to something else if they're seeking something that will qualify them for a grant.
Investors won't like them
potentially investors, but
they don't get as much depreciation. So unwise investors.
Who is the potential person who's going to buy this from you when you're ready to move on?
Yeah. And, it's interesting. I was watching an article or a story on, I think it was ABC News the other night, about the shortage of 3-bedroom apartments. We've been talking about that for a long time, about how there's this glut of 2 bedrooms. But families want to live in 3 bedrooms, let's face it. So, and developers, it hasn't been really profitable for them to build lots and lots of 3-bedroom apartments, and so they haven't. So this is a problem, because if we started to see some supply of 3-bedroom apartments, maybe our view would change a bit. But at the moment, the way the mix typically is, we would just advise you to be very cautious about getting all excited about heaps of new stock being built through this rezoning. So there are a couple of cautions, I guess. So look, as we head into the new year, what we want to encourage you and, encourage you not to put your plans on hold, trying to wait and see what's happening with the market.
Absolutely.
It's really important for you to be clear about what you want to do in your life, your big dreams. And if your big dream is to buy a home, you need to be focused on that and not think that you are bigger than the market and able to wait out or ride out any storms. Because at the end of the day, the market will do what the market does, and none of us are big enough to have any impact on it. We just have to head down, bum up, and do what we need to do to find the best home for our first home and get it.
Yeah, don't sit back and say, let's wait and see what the market does. I think that's the key message here. If this is your goal for 2024, if you're still saving your deposit, look at all the options that are available to you. Get your team around you, and get your mortgage broker to fill you in. A really good mortgage broker who understands and works with first home buyers, knows all of the ins and outs of all the schemes, the grants, the guarantees, the different ways you can do that, parental guarantees. There's all sorts of different things. Go and find out about all of these things. Ask lots of questions. And then you can tick or cross any one of these to say, no, that doesn't work for us, but I at least know what it is. Go and get really good, reliable information. This is a fantastic time to get educated and armed, ready to move forward, so that when you have got everything financially in the right place, ready to move ahead, you actually can just step out and do it. You don't have to then spend the time going, all right, well, now I have to learn about what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. What steps do I take? When do I do? Get yourself armed, get yourself educated. And then when you are in the right position financially, you can just move forward.
Absolutely. Now, we have interviewed a number of brokers on the podcast, and we also have a list of our recommended brokers who we know can actually take you through that process. And so this is a surprise to many people. They can buy a lot sooner than they thought they could.
Yeah.
And so with the right advice, you can make better decisions along that. So if you're wanting access to our recommended brokers, just shoot us an email at support@homebuyeracademy.com.au. We'll send that through to you. The other thing too is that if you're thinking about educating yourself through this period of time, through the Christmas holidays, take the time, take a bit of time aside to get your head in the right space and understand and learn the process of buying a property properly, then the course only costs $990. And let me tell you, well, when I watch people who do not know how to negotiate properly and I see them give away money, they give away a lot more than $990 to the agent and to the vendor, and you can save yourself way more than that if you just know what to do in the right order and how to handle things properly.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out your first home buyer guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you've found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.